أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are on the chapter of Hukm Shar'i. Hukm Shar'i is the address of the legislator related to the actions of the servants. خطاب الشارع المتعلق بأفعال العباد. That's the Arabic, which is it's when we say the Hukm Shar'i is the address of the legislator, it's the legislator addressing us. So telling us what to do and what to not do. Related to the actions of servants. So it's related to our actions. The Creator doesn't give us laws related to technology or things related to material things. Rather, He speaks to us and tells us how to manage our lives related to organizing our relationship with ourselves, with other humans, and with our Creator. It is either conclusively proven, قطعي الثبوت, or such as the Quran and Hadith Mutawatir, or it is dhanni al-thubut, such as the non-mutawatir hadith. So what we're referring to here is that the thing about this, a message from the Creator of the universe, is that as time proceeds, the connection between the point of the message being revealed and the point of time that we're at right now obviously gets longer and longer. And as time gets longer and longer, the problem is that we need to verify what truly was a part of the message and what was not part of the message. So what's really vital in living our lives according to the message of the Creator of the universe is we have to first of all prove this is from the Creator of the universe, which we did in chapter 1. So like I think basically the first 2 or 3 videos. But we need to also verify today that what we have is exactly what was revealed. And if there's going to be some weakness in it, what degree of weakness? Is it 99%? So if it's 100%, it's absolutely unequivocal, unquestionable, really truly the Creator of the universe or the prophet of the Creator of the universe actually said or instructed this thing. If it's 99%, that means there's a possibility of some errors, and to what extent? And then you go down to, let's say, 70% and 60%. At what point in time does this become unreliable? Is it 60? Is it 50? Is it 30? Is it 20? Is it 10? So the problem is that other religions, other than Islam is the only religion in the world that actually has a system to verify the chains of narration in terms of authenticity. So what we're talking about here is because to give a little more depth in the evidences of Islam, the legal texts of Islam, there is either قطعي الثبوت and ظني الثبوت, or قطعي الدلالة and ظني الدلالة. What this means is قطعي الثبوت. Thubut means establishing something firmly in the ground. So we're talking about the chain of narration. So the Prophet ﷺ said something, and then somebody heard it from him, and then he narrated that narration to the next person. So from the Prophet ﷺ to what we call the companions, the Sahaba, and the Sahaba to the next person, which we call the Tabi'een. And for the next generation, so this is the first one is the generation of the Prophet ﷺ himself. So it's the Prophet and his companions, so they're the first generation. Second generation is the Tabi'een. And so we need to, first of all, figure out, did they get the narrations correctly? Who got the narrations? Are they trustworthy? What's their memory like? Have they ever committed a crime? Have they ever made a mistake? Have they ever deceived anybody? There's so many things related to this. And then the next one is then the Atba' Tabi'in, the third generation. So we're looking at the narrations that are passed down along the way. And then from that third generation comes the famous books of narration, Al-Bukhari and Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, and so on. So what we're looking at here is we need, in order to be able to live our lives according to the message of the Creator of the universe, we need to know the chain of narration back to the Prophet. We need to know it, not just guess it, not just some guy says so. We need to be able to know for certainty. I'm not talking you need to know for certain that it's 100% certainty. We're talking I need to know for certain what the level of authenticity of this particular narration is. I know for certain it is about 80%. I know for certain this is weak. This is not a narration that I can take. I know for certain that this was fabricated. This is a lie. Somebody said it. Just because somebody says it doesn't mean it's true. All other religions don't have a way of verifying anything anymore. All other religions, 100% of them, there's no way of verifying anything. It's far too gone. Way too much time has passed. If you look at the Bible, you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They don't even know their last names. They're not even sure which Matthew it is. If you look at the Bible studies, there's a disagreement on 2 different Matthews. In Islam, the Quran specifically is from Allah Azza wa Jal, so every word is from Allah Azza wa Jal, from the Creator of the universe. That we discussed in chapter 1, exactly why that is proven. But now we're talking about the narrations of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. His speech and his actions are also revelation from Allah Azza wa Jal, because the Quran says so. The Quran says that He doesn't speak of His own accord. He speaks, everything He does is guided by revelation. So all the narrations about His speech and His actions came through chains of narration. So we need to be able to know. And the reason why this is so important is because if we can't be sure, then human beings can make up all sorts of garbage like they always do and misguide people. And suddenly we're following the laws of misguided clergymen or liars or corrupt religious people are among the very worst of humanity. Because you can have a person who thinks that he's doing good, who thinks that he's trying to help people. And so this is the kind of person that might give you something relatively useful because he's trying to look out for you. He's misguided because human beings can never figure out what the right thing to do is. Even if you look at today, even the best politicians, even the most sincere politicians are going to mess everything up and still lead people down the path of misery. But when you have a religious person, they're intentionally and they're aware of the fact that they're lying to you. They're aware of the fact that they're lying about God, which is the most corrupt thing that you can do in existence. Literally, on the plane of the purpose of existence, the worst thing you can do in terms of the purpose of existence is lie about the creator of existence and what He said, and saying that, no, I am receiving the message from God. So we need to be able to verify so that we don't fall into the dark ages like in Europe, where they had the clergy making things up. We need to be able to verify that this really is from the Prophet ﷺ and be able to verify the level of authenticity. So we make judgments based on that. So we're going to talk a little more about this, actually quite a bit more about this. But in order to know the laws of Islam, we actually have a process. And this is in Shari'i studies. So if you go to university, you can also study this there's a lot of videos and books that you can get a basic understanding. But if you want to get a proper understanding so that you can actually join the process of deriving laws, you have to have a strong level of education, because there's a lot of detail to it. But when you study it, and I've studied it, I'm a student of Al-Azhar. They also teach it at Medina University and Al-Qura and a number of other universities around the world. Most Islamic universities will teach it to an extent. The Arabic universities teach it in the most greatest depth because there's a lot of Arabic detail to it. But even the non-Arabic, like in Malaysia and so on, they give a decent amount of detail to it for you to get a good understanding of the way it works. And what this allows us is for us to be able to stop anybody who's trying to corrupt the process. There's countless times, and I'm talking in my own lifetime, just from my own experience, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of situations where people have come with a narration and the narration was wrong. It was invalid. It was narrated wrong, or it was already known to be weak narration, and people brought corrupt understanding and corrupt laws. They're corrupting what we knew was what we knew was right. So we already know what the correct law is. And somebody brings a narration and says, well, there's this hadith from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said this, such as, for example, the hadith that we have returned from like when they came back from battle. He said, we came back from the lesser jihad and have come back to the greater jihad, which is the jihad of fighting our desires and so on. This is a weak narration. It contradicts the correct narrations that say that the greater jihad is one of two things. One is you fight battles for the sake of God and for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jalla on a battlefield against foreign powers. So it's an army versus an army and so on. And the second one is to speak the word of truth against a tyrant ruler and then to be killed in the process. So the process of verifying these narrations is crucial in order to have a system that functions precisely according to the message of the Creator and doesn't get corrupted by human corruption. And that's the biggest threat to any message possible. There's nothing more dangerous to the message of the Creator than human corruption. And so I'll add one more thing before I get into the details of Hukm Shari, which is that humans throughout all of time have always been given the opportunity by Allah Azza wa Jal, by the Creator of the universe, to corrupt the message. So every message that was revealed, Allah Azza wa Jal had given them the opportunity. The message was revealed in a way where you can corrupt it, because He was going to send another message later on to correct it. So part of the test of life was not only to do good and to be a good person, to be honest and not lie, and deal justly in the marketplace and be kind to others and so on and so forth, and to implement the laws of the Creator of the universe, but also don't corrupt the message. So the message was not made immune to change because it wasn't the last message. And then another prophet would come and correct the changes. Another prophet would come and correct the changes. People would corrupt it, and more prophets would keep on coming to correct the changes. And then at some point, the Creator of the universe would send a new message. So we had the message of Adam alayhi salam, and then we had the message of Nuh alayhi salam, and then we had the message of, there might have been some in between. Then we had the message of Abraham alayhi salam, and so on. So, and in between them, you had prophets who would refer back to the previous message from their point in time to correct what was changed over time. Now, if you're going to have a final message, this final message has to be unchangeable. It has to be not only immune to change, the immunity has to be detectable by human reason. You should be able to analyze it and come to a conclusion based on the human mind of analysis of figuring out it. I can prove to myself, Muslim or not Muslim, that this is provably unchanged or still reliable. And so that process has to exist. If you don't have that, you can never know if you're following the message of the creator of the universe. Now the message, like Islam, has been here for 1,400 and something years. So at what point, how do we know if anything is still from the creator of the universe? There has to be a reason-based, an intellectual, provable, rational process to determine the authenticity of texts. And that's what we're talking about in terms of hukm shari. So hukm shari, the laws of Islam, have been revealed through mutawatir texts and non-mutawatir texts. So the mutawatir texts, they're the ones that are qat'i al-thubut. So thubut means firmly established. And I know I just actually previously mentioned al-dalala. Al-dalala is the words themselves can have more than one meaning. But I'm not going to get into that for now. I'm not sure. Actually, I do believe we get into this in the next paragraph. So I think it's actually the next sentence we get into ad-dalala. But I'm just going to explain thubut. Thubut is thabata means something has been established as set in stone, set in the ground, rooted properly. So with this study of dhanni and qat'i al-thubut, so conclusive, inconclusive in chain of narration, this is determined by studying the narrators, by looking at their memory and their character and a lot of other studies of ilm al-rijal, the study of humans, the study of men, of the narrators. So somebody says, I have something from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Before we even look at what you have to say, who are you? Who knows anything about you? For example, there's one narration of Imam al-Bukhari, the most famous of the collectors of hadith. He once saw a man who was guiding his donkey into the shed using a carrot on a stick. And he guided him until he got him into the shed. He closed the door. He didn't give him the carrot. And Bukhari said, this is a person that I will not trust. So it's that strict. If a person was reciting Quran and made a mistake and regularly had small errors, even small errors, minor errors in their memorization, this is a person who would be considered weak. We're not going to take from this person. Because this person can make mistakes in the Quran. He can make mistakes in hadith, even more so. So there's a whole line of study in terms of the chain of narration, thubut, which is the chain, establishing the chain back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, rooting it. That's the thing. You're trying to root this chain back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the chain can get weak if there's somebody in there that's weak, somebody in there that has lied. If one narrator anywhere along the chain was known to have lied even once in his life, he is automatically weak. There's no way that they would take anything from this person anymore. Intentionally lied. If he made a mistake, then it's looked into and so on. So this is qat'i al-thubut. And then there is dhanni al-thubut. Dhanni al-thubut. Sorry, and that's thubut. Then there's qat'i and dhanni al-thubut. Qat'i means absolutely unquestionable chain of narration. That means there's something that we have that has determined that there's no possibility of human error in this chain. And then there's dhanni thubut, which means that there's a possibility of human error. It has nothing to do with right or wrong. It has everything to do with just, is there a possibility? Because humans make mistakes. So, the broken phone effect. People, when you were a kid, I'm not sure if any of you have tried this, or when you were kids in kindergarten, if you whisper something into a kid's ear, or you have a little phone and you have a little string, you have a cup with a string, and you say something or you whisper something into it. So there's this thing that I did back in kindergarten and also in school, which is that you whisper to a person something, and then that person whispers to the next person, that person whispers to the next person. And by the time you get to the end of the line, the person is saying something completely different than what you said. So there's always going to be human error. So how do you filter out human error from this process? So the first thing that we determine is there's qat'i and dhanni. Qat'i means 100% unquestionable. There's no possibility there's any error in this narration leading back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the dhanni part, there's a possibility of error. It doesn't mean that it's weak. It doesn't mean that it's unreliable. It just means there's a possibility. So that means it's like 99.9%. 99.9% means there's a 0.1% chance, which is still a significant chance, that a person could make a mistake in the narration. And so that's where the scholars start the topic of dhanni, 99.9%. And they go down from there. So mutawatir, which is 100% qat'i, that chain comes from so many chains of separate narrators. So it can't be like 3 or 4 guys going back to one guy and then going back to the Prophet ﷺ, or like 1,000 people going back to 100 people, going back to one guy, or going back to 2 guys and then back to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. That's not mutawatir, because those 2 guys at the beginning, after the Prophet ﷺ, they could have, or after the Sahaba, they could have made a mistake. So it could go from the Prophet ﷺ to 2 companions to 100 tabi'een to 100,000 atba' tabi'een. And this is still dhanni. This is not qat'i. Just because there's lots of people narrating something, they're all narrating a possible mistake. So this is how dhanni and qat'i work. It's a very precise system that Islam has that ensures the reliability of the chain back to the Prophet ﷺ. Mutawatir starts, so here's the thing to understand here. Mutawatir, or absolute 100% certainty, this, what I'm about to say isn't 100% certainty. This is where you begin to even consider that it might be 100%. It has to come from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to 4 of the companions. 4 separate companions have to tell 4 separate people who do not have a relationship with each other to 4 other separate chains, and they must not have any relationship with each other or anyone backwards in the chain. It has to be, the definition of this type of narration is that it was narrated in a way where you can prove that even if the narrators wanted to conspire to lie, they wouldn't have been able to. Okay, so I'll repeat that again. Qat'i thubut, absolute 100% certainty that we know 100% this goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. There's no possibility of error in it. It has to be narrated in a way where even if the narrators all wanted to conspire to lie, the way that it came, we know that there's no way that they could have even done this, because they never met, they never had a relationship with each other down the chain. Because if you hear, I mean, even today with the internet and so on and so forth, I mean, it's very difficult to understand this with the way the internet is and phones and so on, because people can call each other and right away tell. So today, this wouldn't work at all. There's no way that we could establish this anymore. It's pretty much done. But it could be understood in a way that if right now I were to open up, or I were to open up like, social media, and I were to find that on Instagram and TikTok and Arabic social media and Japanese social media, everybody's talking about a nuclear explosion that took place in X country. There's so many people that are talking about it. There's no way that it could be a lie at that point in time. So you can get an understanding of what mutawatir looks like. When there's a lot of people that narrate something in a way that even if, like, could it be that everyone conspired to lie about this event? If it's done in a way, and that's what I'm saying, you'd have to look into it and study it and whatever. But if it's done in a way where you can look at it and say, there's no possibility that everyone could have so quickly, for example, in today's world, speed would be a factor. If instantly everybody's talking about something, and I realize that this is difficult because somebody could say, well, they're all lying about it right now. That's why today it's very hard to figure this out. But the point is, if something was narrated to you in a way where there's no way that people could have conspired to lie, then you can know this is absolutely 100% true. So the way that the chain works is it goes from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to the companions. It has to be a minimum of 4. This doesn't establish absolute certainty, but this is the starting point of certainty. A minimum of 4 companions to a minimum of 4 tabi'een, which is the generation after, not buddies and friends of the sahaba, of the companions. We're talking about the next generation, the children of the companions, or the children of the people who were alive. Basically, it's the next generation. It's not just from the companions. So we're not talking the companions and their children. We're talking about the Prophet ﷺ to the companions, their generation, and all human beings that lived on that generation. And then the next generation that has tabi'een and everybody else who lives in that generation. And then atba' tabi'een, which are the people who are in the next generation. So we're talking 2 whole generations down in terms of humanity, not just in terms of the companions and their kids or something like this. And that's as far as it goes. That's an important thing to understand. All narrations in Islam are verified up until that point. We don't take anything from anybody after that point. We do not. Anybody could narrate something of the Prophet ﷺ from the atba' tabi'een, so the next generation up. We reject literally 100% of all narrations after that point. The only narrations we take are from the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, his generation, the second generation and the third generation, because there's a hadith that says the best generation is my generation, then the next generation, then the next generation, and then after that there'll be a corruption. So therefore we take only from the first three generations, and there's a lot of things related to how we study this. So in order to know 100% certainty, the narrations had to have come from these minimum standard chains. And then, because the reason why I say it's minimum is because if the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba, the companions, four people, and the four people, the four companions told four tabi'in, and they all know each other. They're all family and friends. And they all told the next four people, and they're all family and friends, they know each other. They could have conspired to lie. They could have shared a lie. So therefore, this is not mutawatir, even though it meets the criteria of 4 and 4 and 4. It has to be done in a way, because remember, back then, communication has to be, you have to travel all the way across the world. So if you find these people, one person's over in for example, Mauritania, another person's over in Pakistan, another person's over in Byzantium, basically, some parts that the Muslims took or even didn't take, but there's a Muslim out there, and another person way over in India or something. And then these narrations, you go to each of these people, and Imam Bukhari used to travel the world in order to find these people, and they would find out that this person and that person, this person, they've verified, they've never met. And that's why mutawatir is a very difficult thing to prove. There's very few mutawatir hadith. So we reject most ahadith as mutawatir. But the narrations that are mutawatir, we've studied how these chains work, or these people narrate it, and we can see there's no possibility, because they're saying the exact same thing. The Prophet ﷺ said, and this hadith that is word for word the exact same thing, and they're all saying the same thing. Therefore, this chain is authentic because it comes from four separate people, and they've each, and again, you have to verify this. They said it from somebody, let's say, for example, somebody that they met in another place. So then you go and you verify, did that person exist, and what do people say about them? And people will know about that guy there. That's what I'm saying. It's a study of humans, ilm al-rijal. And then you verify that, and then you verify that those people got it back from the Prophet, from the Sahaba. So you need from the companions, and you got to verify that. And then from that, you verify that it came from the Prophet ﷺ, because they're companions. As long as you verify that they're a companion, then it did come from the Prophet ﷺ. And then now you have your minimum 4. Now, of course, it can be much more than 4. But that's the minimal process to determine absolute 100% certainty. Anything that's not that, anything that doesn't reach that level, that it's 100%, we know there's no way they could have lied, then we go to dhanni, al-thubut. And the vast majority of narrations that we take are dhanni, and that's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But within dhanni, which is it has a possibility of error in it, then we look at the quality of the narrator. In the first one, we don't care about the quality of the narrator. We just care about the fact that it's impossible for them to have lied. We can tell. All these narrations come. If a person comes to me with an ayah of the Quran and he recites it, as long as I know it's from the Quran, it doesn't matter if he's the biggest liar on the face of the planet. I know this is the Quran. So therefore, I don't care who narrates it, because the Quran is mutawatir. So the whole entire Quran is mutawatir. And then there's some ahadith, such as, for example, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَى. Actions are according to intentions, and absolutely or truly, people will only receive based on their intentions. So if you do a good deed, your intentions determine. If you're trying to impress people or you're trying to get money out of it, Allah Azza wa Jal knows your intentions. So your intentions, you want money, then you get money. That's it. You don't get good deeds for that. But unless Islam says to get money, like you go get a job and so on. But if you're praying, salah, and you're doing this to impress people, or that you want people to give you money, that you want donations, then that's your intention. You're not doing it for Allah Azza wa Jal, you're doing it for money. So So that is the issue of qat'i. So qat'i, it's not about who narrated, it's just about how it was narrated. So it's impossible for them to have lied, because they're all saying the exact same thing. With dhanni, now we're looking at the quality of narrator. And when we're looking at the quality of narrator, we're looking at their memorization, their character, and all these different things about them. Anything that might, even something as simple as having a shameful character, right? Like dancing in public. This would put a person this person's shameful. And so he's a lower quality narrator than somebody who had a high level of character and is very respectable. So there's lots of things related to the science of hadith that we understand in order to know who's a strong and who's a weak narrator. And you can study these today, because the books on the study of men were preserved. That's why you'll have, for example, Sheikh Al-Albani, who's went through all these books and did the whole thing all over again. Personally, I don't think that it was needed. We already have everything pretty much verified. He just gave his own opinion, although other scholars have given their opinion. He even went through a Bukhari and Muslim and tried to verify that. And it's like, well, I mean, first of all, they were the greatest scholars of hadith. And second of all, it's been checked and rechecked by literally thousands upon thousands, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of scholars over the years. So it's kind of, I don't know, I thought it was a little bit a weird thing that everyone was so excited about what he produced. You know, صححه الألباني. Albani has verified it. Well, it's already been verified a long time ago. Either way, but that just proves that these books exist. And that everyone can go, anybody who wants to study ilm al-hadith and verify things for themselves, it's all still there. You don't have to worry about, oh, well, this is ancient history. No, it's all been recorded. It's all been verified by people who are also studying at the same time. And it didn't start with Imam Bukhari. It started with much earlier, Imam Malik and some narrators around that time, which were part of the Atba' Tabi'in. Either way, that's the topic of Dhanni and Qat'i al-Thubut. So it's the chains of narrators, okay? And I'll continue to the next point, which is al-Dalala. Now, if it is Qat'i al-Thubut in its meaning, and its meaning is definitive, Qat'i al-Dalala, the hukm will be conclusive. So now, I realize that's maybe a little bit confusing, but what we're studying here is something deep. We're studying something, this is not just some little fun thing, let's talk about how to have good manners. We're talking about something deep to understand how hukm shar'i works. So what we need is to focus, and even if you have to write little details, little charts, you have to do this in order to understand how the legal process of Islam works. It's not overly complicated or convoluted at all. It's actually quite simple, but you have to spend some time really thinking about it. The first two categories is of the chains of narration is Qat'i and Dhanni. Qat'i, it means absolutely. This chain goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, and it's 100%, what the wording of the narration is 100% correct. And then the second is the Dhanni al-Thubut, which is the chain of narration could have a possibility of error in it. That's the first thing. Now, after we've established which one it is, that the chain, how reliable that is, but then we have the wording itself. Now, the wording itself could have more than one meaning in it. The Prophet ﷺ might say, for example, the time of Asr is when the shadow is twice. Okay, so twice, does he mean twice like he's talking about twice the length, or he says it's twice the length. So what you do is you put a stick into the ground, let's say 2 o'clock. You put a stick into the ground, and then you look at the shadow cast by the sun, and you look at the length of that shadow, and once it's twice the length of the stick, then that's the time of Asr. That's when Asr starts. So the question here, does he mean twice the length of the stick plus the angle away from the position of the sun where you are on earth, so you add a certain amount and so on? And there's a lot of discussion about that and about how what this hadith exactly means. The Shafi'i opinion, anyways, I'm not going to get into the opinions, but the point is that this is called al-dalala. The first one's called thubut. This second topic is called dalala. There's qat'i al-dalala and dhanni al-dalala. Qat'i al-dalala is the wording is unambiguous. It can only mean one thing. Now, this is known in the Arabic language. We don't go by English translations. In the Arabic language, when you look at it, you say, okay, this is very clear. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَى. There's only one meaning for this. Right? Actions are according to intentions, and you only get whatever you intended. So this is very clear. So if the chain is qat'i and the meaning is qat'i, the ruling is qat'i. Okay, the ruling that comes from it is absolute. So there's no question about this ruling. There's no disagreement among the scholars about this ruling, and you won't find any disagreement among the scholars about the meaning of this hadith. Actions are according to intentions. So you won't find disagreement that this is what the hadith means. You might have disagreement on the branches of how to extrapolate more rulings and so on, but the meaning of this, that actions are according to intentions, all scholars agree on this. The second one is dhanni al-dalala. So you might have something that's qat'i al-thubut, you know it's absolutely from the Prophet ﷺ, but it has more than one meaning. And so scholars will disagree on what the Prophet ﷺ meant in this narration. And therefore, if it comes from the qat'i al-thubut, so the absolute chain, and an absolute meaning, this is what we're saying here, then the ruling will be conclusive. It'll be qat'i, it'll be absolute. An example of this is the number of all prescribed raka'at in salah. This is a great example, obviously, which is that when we pray salah, the structured salah, We're not talking about different salawat, for example, like the salah of eclipses or the salah of the funeral and so on. We're talking about the 5 prayers per day. Al-salawat al-ratiba, the structured obligatory 5 prayers per day. So the number of all the prescribed rak'ah in salah, the fact that dhuhr is 4, asr is 4, maghrib is 3, isha is 4, and fajr is 2. So these numbers that we have, and the number of rak'at in salah, the number of salawat and the number of rak'at in each salah, which I just mentioned, these are qat'i. They come from a qat'i chain. We know absolutely there's like not just 4, there's hundreds of chains, and they're all identical. Everyone's saying the exact same thing. There's not one single difference of opinion on the number of prayers per day, and there's not one single difference of opinion on the number of rak'at per salah. And therefore, the ruling is absolute. Okay, what that means in terms of the repercussions of rejecting and so on, that's something we'll talk about a little bit later. But that's the first thing: is the hukm becomes conclusive. So the example of this is the number of the rak'at in salah, as they are mentioned in the hadith, because they're mentioned in the hadith mutawatir. Excuse me. Likewise, the prohibition of riba, okay, interest, or what they might call usury, which is the definition of interest, by the way. People talk about, well, it's lots of gain. No, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Kul manfa'a, kul dain jar manfa'a fahuwa riba." Any loan that draws back benefit is interest, is riba. It's forbidden. And another narration, the Prophet ﷺ said, there are 70 levels of interest. The lowest is the least sinful. The top is the most sinful. Okay, so there's 70 levels of sin in interest. The lowest of which, the sin is equivalent to fornicating, which is to have sexual relations with your own mother right next to the Kaaba in the middle of Mecca. Okay, the lowest level of sin is equivalent to doing something absolutely disgusting like that. So the Prophet ﷺ identified how significant the sin of dealing with riba is, and the Quran says that Allah Azza wa Jal declares war on anybody who deals with riba and so on. So if anyone's listening who has interest, an interest loan in your life or something like this, immediately get rid of it, because it is an enormity. It's an enormity. Enormities, so there's 2 different types of sins. There's enormities and regular sins. The enormities, Allah says in the Quran, if you avoid the enormities, He'll erase all of your other sins. But the enormities, when you commit them, you have to specifically repent for them, and you have to specifically fix what you've done. So if you've hurt somebody, you have to go fix it. And if you have done something, whatever it might be, you have to show that you're fixing, that you're improving, that you're doing something to correct it. So the enormities are not forgivable, Allahu A'lam, but they're not forgivable unless you specifically ask for forgiveness, you do a full repentance, and you do something to compensate for what you've done. You've shown that you're reformed, that you've repented. Riba, interest, is one of them. It's an enormity. This person is going to be punished in the hellfire unless Allah forgives them, specifically because they asked for forgiveness. And again, only Allah knows whom He's going to forgive on the Day of Judgment. So this sin is absolutely enormous. If you have riba, and it's a big problem, especially in the West, you have to get out of it. It's any loan that you've taken or given, and you've given extra on it. You've given even $1 or $2. You borrow 100, you give back 102. This is riba. It's punishable, the same as giving 200 back or 1,000 back or 1,000,000 back. It doesn't matter. Any riba at all is an enormity, completely forbidden by Islam. So the same with the prohibition of riba, because it's in the Quran. The Quran specific. So the Quran is mutawatir, and the ayat that talk about forbidding riba are unequivocal. There's no 2 meanings about it. It's only one single meaning. So it's qat'i al-thubut, because the Quran is mutawatir, and it's qat'i al-dalala. The meaning is only one. It's absolute. So therefore, the hukm of riba is absolute. You have some people saying, oh, well, no, there's some room of interpretation. No. Minority fiqh, no. We're living in the West, no. All of that is wrong. There's no such thing as you changing a ruling just because you feel like it. When it's unequivocal, when it's unquestionable, it's qat'i al-thubut and qat'i al-dalala. You can't play with that ruling anymore. It stays exactly as is. Unless there's another evidence that gives you an exception. But there's no evidence that gives an exception for riba. The amputation of the hand of the thief, that's also in the Quran. So it's qat'i in the chain and qat'i in the meaning. Ayah in the Quran says, وَالسَّارِقُ وَالسَّارِقَةُ فَاقْطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا. The thief, male and female, you cut their hand. Now there's minimums of what there has to be. For example, it has to be, as far as I recall, I believe it's a half a dinar, which is about 2 grams, a little over 2 grams of gold's worth. It has to be breaking and entering. The person has to not be in poverty. There's rules of how to. It's not like Aladdin, like the cartoon, where he goes and steals an apple because he's in poverty, and then the guy pulls out a sword and is going to cut his hand off. That's not how it works. Rather, there's conditions, and it has to go to court. And the judge is the one who determines if this person meets the criteria of having their hand cut. If the person's in poverty and they go and steal, the ruler is the one who's sinful, not the person who stole. That's an interesting thing in Islam, that the ruler is the one who's sinful in front of Allah on the Day of Judgment, and he'll be punished by Allah Azza wa Jal, unless Allah forgives him, for the poverty of the people who are stealing. So he's responsible for the theft, the ruler, not the people who are stealing because they're hungry. But somebody might steal more than what they need, then now they're being accountable. You go and steal a car when you can if a person went and took some food, and that's why in some of the Muslim lands you can go and take some food from, like, there's certain places that allow you to come and take some food. Even in the West, you'll find restaurants that people prepay for stuff. But in the Muslim lands, and generally the way it should be, is that there should be provisions always available to people who don't have anything. That way they don't feel the need to steal. But if a person is not doing well financially, but he's just stealing cars and whatever, at that point in time, it's obvious this person's spreading corruption in the earth. And that's another rule. The lashing of the adulterer. So in Islam, this is another interesting thing. The West looks at like men not being allowed to talk to women. Men and women are not allowed to free mix, so it's forbidden. Women having to cover themselves and so on. People ask in the West, why do we do why do you do these things, and isn't this oppressive and so on? They don't understand that in the West, in the world in general today, but especially in the West, their society revolves around allowing premarital intercourse. So the society allows this. This is totally okay. But in an Islamic system, it preserves the family and preserves lineage. And therefore, these types of relations are illegal. They are a crime in society. People might say, well, that's an oppressive thing. Well, that's your choice. And in our viewpoint, you allowing a man to cheat on his wife, and there's no criminal process for that. And I don't know if people are clear about this. In the West, a man can cheat on his wife 100 times a day with 1,000 different women, and there's no repercussions whatsoever. Just oh, you're a bad guy. And actually, some people would be like cheering him on, like, whoa, whatever. The thing is that in Islam, the protection of lineage and the protection of the family and the protection of women, actually, when men go and cheat and so on, is the protection of women from being taken advantage of, by being used and then thrown away. Because a lot of women who get into relationships with married men and so on, they get into the relationship because of need. They're lonely and they can't find a man, and then a man who just wants a fleeting experience will use her and then throw her away, breaking her heart and making her untrusting of future men and really damaging society. So Islam forbids these actions from society in order to protect morality and families and women and also men as well. So, but the point here is that this hukum, this ruling of whipping. So we're talking about lashing the adulterer. وَالزَّانِيَةُ وَالزَّانِي فَجْلِدُوا كُلَّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا مِئَةَ جَلْدَةٍ. So if a person is caught, now you have to have 4 witnesses. So the what's required in order to prove that a person committed adultery, you have to have 4 eyewitnesses who saw it, and they have to go to court and they have to say that I saw it with my own eyes. Then the 2 people who are people in the West often say, oh well, it's the women are going to be whipped. Yeah, in really corrupt societies, maybe today, but the Islamic Khilafah fell in 1924. We're talking prior to 1924. All what's going on today is all garbage, basically. It's all just criminals and hypocrites and tyrants and whatever, all making things up and hurting each other. But in a proper Islamic system, which is what we're working to restore, the real actual Islamic system, in that system, if there's 4 eyewitnesses and they saw the person committing premarital intercourse or extramarital intercourse, so if he's married and outside of marriage, or she is, then both of them get whipped 100 lashes in public with there's again lots of rulings for punishments with the hardest type of whip. There's different types. Some punishments have a softer whip, and this one punishment specifically has the hardest type of whip. And the Quran says, and without mercy. You whip them mercilessly in front of a public whipping. What this does is it protects society. People say, well, this is backwards. No, not at all, actually. This is in tune exactly with human psychology to prevent people from committing this crime. This crime is one of the most difficult ones to stop. If you want to have a society that doesn't do this, it has to be driven by people's love for Allah Azza wa Jalla, the love for wanting to go to heaven and earn Allah's pleasure and to stay away from the hellfire and so on. But some people are still going to give in to their desires, so you need to have something that scares people, and public humiliation for this sort of crime is a huge obstacle for a lot of people, and that's how you protect society. It's about protecting society from immorality and children without a father who ran away, or sexual STDs, diseases, and so on. So, and again, the point here is this comes from a mutawatir chain, which is the Quran, and the meaning وَالزَّانِيَةُ وَالزَّانِي, it says both men and women, the man who commits adultery and the woman who commits not just adultery, because adultery is referring to while you're married and or I think it's referring to, the fornication is referring to outside of marriage, and adultery is if you're married. This is referring to either, there's more to it. If you're married, according to Islam, there's a much harsher punishment. But what this ayah is referring to is if a person is unmarried and they're caught in fornicating, then they are whipped 100 lashes in public. And the wording is unambiguous. Therefore, it's qat'i al-thubut, so the chain is 100% because it's the Quran, and the meaning is 100%. It's qat'i al-dalala, because the meaning is, there's no two meanings to the wording. And they are conclusive rules whose correctness is definite, and there is only one single conclusively proven opinion on it. Okay, just because some clowns today, some kids actually, some total ignoramuses who have no study in background in Sharia will go and say, oh no, this is referring to this, or time has changed and it should change. These are people who that's why we're talking about a conclusively proven opinion. These are people who have no proof of their opinion. They just say this. Oh, well, we have to do this. And a lot of them are not even Muslim anymore for saying that Islam is no longer valid, being to change rulings. But according to if you go through the process of verifying the chains, and you verify the meaning and so on, it's provably that this is from the Creator, and it's provably that this is the meaning, and there's no other meaning, and therefore this is the ruling. That's what we're talking about. It's a speech of the legislator. So when we say the legislator, we're talking about the source of laws. Really, the legislator is Allah Azza wa Jal. But when we say the speech of the legislator, khitab al-shari', we're talking about Allah Azza wa Jal's commands and prohibitions in the Quran, and His commands and prohibitions in the actions and the speech of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So if the speech of the legislator is qat'i thubut, so absolute in chain, and does not yield a definite meaning, it's dhanni al-dalala, the meaning could be multiple things, then the included hukum, the included ruling, is indefinite. What it means is that there's room for the scholars to disagree on this. Okay? For example, the ayah related to jizya in the Quran. So in the Quran, there's an ayah about taking a tax from the non-Muslims who are living under the Islamic State. And for anybody who might say, well, there's that's oppression against non-Muslims. And no, Muslims have a tax. It's called zakah. And the non-Muslims have a tax called jizya. So the Quran talks about the jizya that the non-Muslims have to pay in the society. So the ayah is qat'i thubut. It's absolute in chain. We know because it's from the Quran. But the meaning is not definite. The Hanafi school stipulated that it be called jizya. Specifically, it has to be called jizya. And those who are required to pay it must be in a state of humiliation when rendering payment. Because the ayah says, حَتَّى يُعْطُوا الْجِزْيَةَ عَنْ يَدٍ وَهُمْ صَاغِرُونَ. وَهُمْ صَاغِرُونَ is that it means that they have to be humiliated. So the Hanafi opinion actually is that they have to live in a certain way, or look a certain way, or it has to be done in a certain way that humiliates them. However, the Shafi'i school, which is the school that I follow, and that generally Hizb al-Tahrir is very, very similar to, the Shafi'i school did not stipulate calling it jizya, so you can call it other things. They used to call it double zakah. They did not, but they did not require the one paying it to be humiliated, but them paying it to the authority of the rule of Islam is enough of a submission, because then it's looked at as a submission. وَهُمْ صَاغِرُونَ, meaning that they have submitted to the rule of Allah Azza wa Jal. So there's difference of opinion on what this could mean. There's another very well-known example that I usually tend to use, because this is another very big difference between the Hanafi and the Shafi'i school of thought, which is there's an ayah in the Quran that says that أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاء. So there's a verse in the Quran that talks about if you what happens, what causes the loss of your wudu when you do wudu. So you want to go and pray. So you can lose your wudu through a number of ways, but this topic has to do with men and women, relations between men and women. So this ayah says أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاء, or if you, and then لَامَسْتُم could mean you touched women with desire, or it could mean you had relations with women. with one's wife, you lose your wudu, and the woman loses her wudu as well. Same thing. Like, it counts both men and women. So, أو لامستم النساء, it could mean one of the two things. So the Shafi'i school of thought says that if you end up touching it, lamasum has to be with this is not lamps with the back of your hand, it's with the palm of your hand. And this is a linguistic thing. You go into poetry and you go into the history of the Arabic language and the usages of the words, you'll find that the poets and the Arabs did not use this as lamps. Lamps is with the hands. And even when I say it, I can tell. I know that lamps is like this with your hands. So so the scholars differed. So the Shafi'i school of thought says that it's from the palm of your hand touching the skin of a woman, and that causes you to lose your wudu. That means you have to go and redo your wudu. The Hanafi opinion says no, it's having intimate relations between a husband and a wife, basically. But it can obviously be outside of that relation as well. So, but it has to do with intercourse. And so the Hanafi, if he ends up touching, and it does include like a person's wife. If a person touches his wife's hand, he loses his wudu. It's not about halal or haram. So the Hanafi opinion would not lose wudu. The man would not lose wudu if he touched someone's hand, a woman's hand. Whereas and we're talking about, and again, I don't want to get into too much detail about this because it's a big topic. But we're talking about women that like men and women that they can each marry. So this does not count for what we call mahram. So my daughters, my aunts, my grandmothers, my mother, and so on. This doesn't. The Shafi'i opinion says you can, if you touch them on the hand or whatever, you don't lose your wudu. You only lose your wudu for people who you could have desire for, legal desire for. So it has to be non-mahram women, basically women who you're allowed to marry. If you touch them, because it's linked to desire. Whereas the Hanafi opinion says it doesn't count at all. It has to be a physical intercourse in order for you to lose wudu. That's what the ayah is referring to. So you can see, the thing is, the word lamastum in the Arabic language has more than one meaning. And there's so many more examples all throughout the Quran and Sunnah where the meaning is, there's more than one meaning. And by the way, this is by design. Islam was revealed to include this. The Prophet ﷺ addressed this difference, and a lot of the time, he didn't even tell the Sahaba when they differed, he didn't even tell them who was right. He allowed them to differ. He approved of them differing. Abu Bakr and Umar, the two greatest of the Sahaba, they differed among themselves on many things. For example, the divorce. Is it 3 divorces? Like when you say, when I'll give you one more example. When a man is divorcing his wife, in Islam, the Prophet ﷺ said, in simplicity, the Prophet ﷺ said that if a man says the words, "You are divorced," anti talaq, it's even joking about it, you've divorced her. And a man's only allowed to divorce his wife 3 times. The third one is irrevocable. She has to marry someone else and get a real divorce, not just like planned a divorce. She has to actually marry him, and they have to have relations, and then he has to naturally divorce her for an actual, like for a real reason, not a planned reason, just so she can go back. And then she can go back and marry him. So al-talaq thalath in the Quran says the divorce is 3 times. And so the Prophet ﷺ said it's initiated by the statement you're divorced. Abu Bakr held the opinion of it has to be 3 separate sittings, meaning you can say talaq, 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 talaq. In one sitting, it only counts as 1. You have to go and cool off and whatever, and there's another conversation. Then if you say talaq again, that's the second talaq. And then there has to be 3 separate divorces in order for it to be counted as the third final divorce. Umar's opinion was no. If a man says talaq, talaq, talaq in one sentence, he's divorced her all 3 times. She's irrevocable. She has to go and marry someone else. She can't come back to him. So it's because the ayah in the Quran says al-talaqu thalath marrat. So the meaning is ambiguous, but the chain of narration is 100%. So the Quran allows these things. So the Sahaba would come to the Prophet ﷺ and talk about their disagreements. There's an example of in a battle that happened where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Don't pray until you reach Bani Qurayza." But the problem was in that travel, they would have missed all Maghrib and so on. Or don't pray Asr until you reach Bani Qurayza. So there's some disagreement happened among the Sahaba about what that means. And they ended up going to the Prophet ﷺ after disagreeing and disputing and going to the place that they were told to go to. Some of them missed their salah, some of them prayed on time. It's a long story. I'll maybe get into it in another video. They came to the Prophet ﷺ and he did not tell them who was right. That's really important. He did not correct them, because had he never allowed people to disagree, and had he gotten mad, that's another evidence. Had he gotten mad when they disagreed, then he would have, that means that would have been evidence for us that this is not allowed in Islam. But the Prophet ﷺ said, hakam al-hakim, if the judge, if a person tried to determine the rule of Allah Azza wa Jal from the Quran and Sunnah, reaches if the judge tries to determine the law and he reaches the correct opinion, he gets double the reward. And if he reaches one of the incorrect but valid opinions, he gets one reward. So he still is rewardable for trying. And therefore, Islam has difference of opinion. It's part of, and anybody who's studied in the Sharia universities or just studied Sharia in general, you'll find that what this does is it keeps the mind alive. So it teaches you to think, it teaches you to analyze, it teaches you to question evidence. You don't just say, well, here's one book, it says everything in it, and then that's it. It'll lead to intellectual stagnation. So I'm not sure if this is why Allah Azza wa Jal did this, made this a part of Islam, but one thing I see as a benefit in it is it creates a level of intellectualism, and intellectualism in a good way, meaning that it causes you to think and analyze and question evidences. You've learned to ask questions about why is this and so on, and it allows people to prove to Allah Azza wa Jal they're willing to put in more effort and study more and think more and have more sincerity and less bias and so on in order to try to reach the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jal to get the double reward, but you still get one reward for trying. That's basically how this works when it's dhanni al-dalala, when the meaning, dalala means indicating. So thubut means foundation or roots, and dalala means indicating. So the words might indicate more than one thing, but the roots are established, or the roots might be like not fully rooted. So it like I said, it could be 99 all the way down to whatever weak narration it could be. But the meaning, there's no such thing as a weak meaning. It's just that there could be more than one meaning. There's either one meaning only, that's qat'i, or there's more than one meaning. So you have lots of different meanings, and people can debate and discuss about why they think. Now, only scholars are allowed to do this. You have to have studied the Arabic language, and you have to understand how the process works. You're not allowed to just say, well, I just think that this could mean, anything I want. No, there's rules on how to look at these things. And like I said, these are things that a person has to study. But there's a certain process, but it allows difference of opinion, and it's part of the design of Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ allowed it during his lifetime. So we talked about jizya and so on. If the speech of the legislator is dhanni al-thubut, such as the non-mutawatir, so dhanni al-thubut, meaning the chain there's room for error in it, such as the non-mutawatir hadith, then the hukm included will not be definitive, regardless of whether the meaning is qat'i. So the meaning can be absolute, but the chain is not 100%. The ruling is not 100%. For example, fasting 6 days of Shawwal, or the prohibition of leasing agricultural land, both of which are proven through the Sunnah. So the thing is that fasting 6 days of Shawwal comes from a sahih hadith, an authentic hadith, but it's not qat'i, it's not 100%. But the meaning is absolute. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever fasts 6 days of Shawwal, it's as if he fasted the whole entire year. And so the chain isn't 100%, although it's you can say like it's 85, 90%. So it's authentic. It's more than good enough for us to accept and take our laws from. But the meaning is 100%. The ruling is not 100%, but we still, of course, act on it. And it's proven through the Sunnah. The hukum shar'i is understood from the address of the legislator. So I said khitab al-shari', which is the commands, the wordings that say do and don't do and so on from the text of the Quran and Sunnah, through a correct ijtihad. So just to touch quickly on the topic of ijtihad. So this chapter is there's a lot to talk about. As I said, what we're doing is we're trying to understand how the system of Islam works. This is not just something that just come into it and just quick, 2-minute TikTok video. This is a deep topic, and we need to understand it clearly for those who want to understand how the system works and participate in restoring it. The process of ijtihad is the process of verifying the chain, verifying the meaning, and deriving the law from all of that after understanding the reality that you're trying to understand. So the reality, you have to understand what it is, what you're talking about, and then you need to go to the evidences, and you have to know how to analyze the evidences in terms of chains and in terms of meanings. Thus, the ijtihad of a mujtahid produces the hukm shar'i. Accordingly, Allah Azza wa Jall's hukm for every mujtahid is the hukm that mujtahid arrived at through his ijtihad and what he most likely thinks is correct. This is a really important point here. When a mujtahid who's a scholar in deriving law from the Quran and Sunnah, the laws of Allah Azza wa Jal. He's coming to the conclusion, to the best of his knowledge, after fully completing his ijtihad, he will determine that this ruling is the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jal. He's now accountable to that ruling. Even if another ruling is correct, but he doesn't know that it's correct, we'll only know on the Day of Judgment, or maybe later on in life he gains more knowledge and he realizes that one's correct. But at this point in time, all he knows is this is the most correct opinion that I have, he has to follow that ruling as if it is 100% the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jal. He's not allowed to abandon it and choose something easier. And that's why for us as Muslims, when we're following the opinions of mujtahideen, we're not allowed to follow the easiest one. You have to follow whatever you believe is the most accurate one, either because you trust a scholar or you trust a person who has a lot of knowledge and they trust that scholar. If you were to come to me and I say, like, for example, the Shafi'i madhab, or the opinions of Sheikh Taqiyuddin Nabhani, or the opinions of X, Y, and Z, if you trust me, and because you're still studying, you don't know anything about this stuff, but you trust what I've taught you, and you've looked at what I've taught you, and you found that, okay, this is really reliable, or you see my character or something like this, and then you trust me, and therefore you trust my knowledge, and I say this person's trustworthy, and then you start following this mujtahid, or you start following the school of thought or the scholar, you have to stay following it until there's a reason to distrust. Either you've gained so much knowledge that you can now question the evidences, you end up knowing, like close to as much or more than me, and then you can make your own decision now, and so on. It's about seeking what you believe is the most likely ruling of Allah Azza wa Jal, not the easiest thing, because you have to understand, among the opinions, only one of them is correct. Some people say you can just follow, they're all from Allah Azza wa Jal. That's wrong. One of them is correct, all the rest are wrong, but within the realm of what's acceptable ahkam shari'ah or acceptable ijtihadat, conclusions or opinions of the scholars, whatever is considered within the boundaries of what's acceptable in Islam, they're all rewardable, and so you can follow anyone you want, but all of them are wrong except for one. So you can't just pick and choose whichever one you want, because there are wrong ones among them. You're trying to find out the right one, and you either find it through knowledge because you know so much and you know the evidences and you can look at strength versus weakness, or you go with whoever you believe is the most reliable person, the most trustworthy person, the most consistent person, whatever you have, whatever tools you have in front of you that gives you an indicator that this person is the most trustworthy person to give me what I believe is most likely the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jal. It has been agreed upon among scholars that if a mukallaf, so a mukallaf is anybody who is responsible to follow the rules of Allah Azza wa Jal. So a person who's sane and so on. A person who's non-mukallaf is a person who's insane, who has something wrong with them that they're unable to follow the laws of Allah Azza wa Jal, meaning on the Day of Judgment, they're not accountable. A mukallaf is a person who's accountable for all the laws of Allah Azza wa Jal on the Day of Judgment. So the one under legal responsibility fulfills the capacity of ijtihad in one question or more, and makes ijtihad and reaches thereupon a hukm. He is not allowed to follow other mujtahideen in the issue, because it would be taqleed of an opinion which is different to what is most likely correct in his opinion. So I just said this, but in a different way. So if you're a mukallaf, meaning you're legally responsible. So you're not a child under the age of puberty. So under the age of puberty, there's no accountability. Any child who dies before reaching puberty, they go straight to heaven. Anybody after puberty, they're now accountable. They're a mukallaf, unless you're insane and whatever other possibilities that makes a person not accountable on the Day of Judgment. But everybody else is a mukallaf. A person who's a mukallaf, who does ijtihad, they become qualified in performing ijtihad and reaches an opinion on a particular hukum, he's not allowed to follow any other mujtahideen on this issue, because he'll be following the opinion of somebody else who he believes is incorrect. So he has to follow his own opinion. The muttabi', okay, so muttabi' is a person who's following, who has a foundation of good knowledge in ijtihad. Well, let me see. Let me read through this section. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read through this section, because this is yet another, this is the definition of the different type of mujtahideen. So I'll read this whole section, then I'll come back and I'll explain the whole entire thing, instead of reading these sentences, because it works with previous paragraphs, but this one, you need to get a full idea, and then I can break it down. The muttabi' is a person who has acquired some important knowledge in ijtihad, and consequently follows the hukum after understanding its dalil. Accordingly, Allah Azza wa Jal's hukum for this muttabi' is the opinion of the mujtahid whom he follows. The ammi, so we talked about a muttabi', and now we're talking about an ammi. Just keep that in mind. The ammi is the person who does not possess some important knowledge in ijtihad and hence follows the mujtahid without having knowledge of the dalil for the hukm. This ammi has to follow the opinion of the mujtahideen and apply the ahkam they have deduced. The hukm shar'i on his part is the one deduced by the mujtahid whom he follows. Therefore, the hukm shar'i is the hukm deduced by the mujtahid who is qualified to practice ijtihad. It is Allah Azza wa Jalla's hukm for him, and he is not allowed to leave it to follow another opinion. It is also Allah Azza wa Jalla's hukm for those who follow the mujtahid, and they are not permitted to leave it. All right, I'll make it simple. And again, like I said, these are all deep topics because we're talking about how the system functions in its core and how it's all categorized. So there's two categories of people: a mujtahid and a muqallid. Okay, a muqallid is taqlid means to imitate. So these people are imitators, and these people are the mujtahid. Ijtihad means people who exhaust their effort. Okay, now what it really means is those who exhaust their effort in looking into all the evidences in order to understand the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jal, to derive the hukm of Allah, the ruling of Allah, to the best of their ability. These are the scholars of deriving laws. Everybody else who's not a mujtahid is a muqallid. Everybody, 100% of everybody who's not a mujtahid, you're a muqallid. A muqallid is a person who's imitating the opinions or following the opinions of the mujtahideen. Okay? The mujtahideen, there's three categories of them. We mentioned one of them in this paragraph. Okay? So there's the lowest category of a mujtahid is the mujtahid mas'ala. Okay? So it's the mujtahid who he only has enough knowledge, because remember, the mujtahideen come from the muqallideen. So a muqallid, there's two categories of muqallideen. One of them is the one who knows the evidences. So as you gain more and more knowledge, you slowly reach a point where you've hit the threshold of ijtihad. Now you have so much knowledge. Again, you start from like not knowing anything to knowing more and more and more, until now you have so much knowledge, you start to understand how the laws are derived. But you don't have so much knowledge that you can derive it on like a dozen topics. You only have enough knowledge on one single topic. What happens actually in the process of becoming a scholar of ijtihad is you end up learning everything about one scholar's opinion or various scholars' opinions on one topic. So you end up knowing almost everything there is to know about one topic. That's how it starts. You become a mujtahid in one single topic. That's a mujtahid mas'ala, mujtahid of one issue. So that's where everyone starts off. That's the lowest level of ijtihad. That's where you start, because now you've understood all the evidences. You'll start to understand what the scholars are referring to in their evidences, how they analyze their evidences, how they differ on their evidences, and how they differ on their interpretations, and so on. So therefore, in order for you to go from a mujtahid mas'ala to the next level, so there's three levels. There's the first mujtahid, which is mas'ala. You only really know everything about one topic, maybe two topics. That's how you gain. But then you gain enough knowledge in this mas'ala and that mas'ala and this mas'ala. Now suddenly you know all these different topics in great depth. Now suddenly you have and usually and this is the way it's supposed to be, and this is the way it almost always is done. You become very knowledgeable in a school of thought. And that's why the scholar said, even if you don't end up staying with the school of thought, master one school of thought first if you're going to become a scholar. Become a scholar in one school of thought, then you can switch. It's not like once I become Shafi'i, I won't understand anything else. No, you'll know all the other schools because you're going to be comparing. But you become a master in one school, and then you can look at other schools and determine if there's a stronger school of thought. Easy. And like I said, once a person masters one school of thought, this idea that, you've been brainwashed into one school of thought, or you'll only understand things one way, is completely false. I know lots of people who went from one school to another school, and through an immense amount of knowledge. So to go from a mujtahid mas'ala, from knowing one issue or two issues, whatever, to become a mujtahid madhhab, which is a mujtahid within one school of thought, you gain so many issues within that school of thought that you know how the school of thought analyzes all these issues. So now you know how to derive laws according to the school of thought. So there's rules in this school of thought on how to derive laws. There's rules on how to interpret a command. If the Prophet ﷺ said, do something, is that an obligation? Is it a recommendation? That's one topic. There's lots of different topics within a school of thought on how they, as a school of thought, analyze the meanings of the words and the combinations of the words and the positions and the strengths and weaknesses. Then you become a mujtahid madhhab. The next level is a mujtahid mutlaq. It's mutlaq means it's like you've released something, right? If you take a horse that in its cage and it's getting ready for a race and just let it go, you open up the door. This is itlaq. Itlaq actually is you shoot a bullet out of a gun. You release the bullet. So this is a mujtahid who's been released. You've gained so much knowledge of this school of thought that you're able to now question the rules that they follow. You gain so much knowledge in the rules that you can now derive your own rules. Now you have your own understanding of how to interpret the evidences. Then you become a mujtahid mutlaq. Now you can form your own school of thought if you want it. A lot of them don't. They still stay within certain schools of thought. But you can, because a school of thought is in and of itself, it's not like you just form a school of thought. There's details about how that happens. Generally, it happens when people just start following that school of thought. But the point is, a mujtahid mas'ala is a person who's a master of just one topic or one or two or three topics, and that they don't have much more than that. But then you gain enough topics, you gain mastery of all these different topics, the ijtihadat, the how to derive the law, that you become a master in the school of thought. Even though you know the other schools of thought, but this is the school of thought that you've mastered. And you understand why they have the rules, and you understand the rules and why the rules are implemented. So you're still following the school of thought. And then you gain so much knowledge in the rules that you start to question the rules themselves. And if anybody wants to study, for example, even especially if you study with Hizb al-Tahrir, the book that you should be reading to understand this transition is a book called The Islamic Personality Part 3. It's in English, but really it has to be studied in Arabic because ijtihad, or the rules of ijtihad, are the rules of the Arabic language primarily. So you become a mujtahid mutlaq, which now you can determine your own rules for interpreting as well as your own conclusions using those rules. That's a mujtahid mutlaq. So those are the three types of mujtahid. That's the first category. Second category is a muqallid. A muqallid is a person who follows a mujtahid. There's two types of muqallideen. The lower level, which is just a muqallid ammi. We said this here. The ammi is the person who does not possess some important knowledge. And then the other one is a muqallid muttaba', which is the first one. The muttaba' is the person who has acquired some important knowledge. So the difference between them is that the ammi, when he wants to know the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jalla, somebody says this is haram, he says okay, that's it. So the ammi means general. He's just a general follower. And that's everybody basically, unless you're a muttaba'. Okay, so if we're talking about the mujtahideen, if you're not a mujtahid, you're everybody else. Everybody else is a muqallid. If you're only one of two types of muqallideen, so everybody else is in this category. All of us basically are in this category. Anybody who's not a mujtahid, you're a muqallid. Of this, if you are somebody who asks the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jalla, and somebody says this is the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jalla, this is halal, you say okay, jazakallah khair. You're an ammi. You're a person who just generally follows the rules without knowing why. The muqallid muttaba' means a person who follows along, who's watching the steps of the person. You don't know even why the rules are what they are. You don't know the rules of ijtihad. But when somebody says this is haram, you ask what's the evidence for it? And he says because the Prophet ﷺ said 1, 2, 3. And if you don't really understand why, you say, can you explain how that fits? And you can say, because when the Prophet ﷺ, for example, here's an example about the beard. Some people say that the beard is an obligation. The Prophet ﷺ said, grow the beard and shorten the mustache. So is that an obligation? A muttaba', you don't have to be a mujtahid to do this. You have to be, but if you want to be a muttaba', a follower, which gets you to the point of ijtihad, you ask why, or rather, what's the evidence that the Prophet ﷺ said that the beard is an obligation? He gives you the hadith. If you are more advanced because as you gain more knowledge, you're going to ask an extra question. The Prophet ﷺ saying, grow your beard, is that an obligation? Or is it a recommendation? Or is it neutral? Grow your beard, because it's a nice thing to do. Or because he said, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said, I don't eat lizard. Right? So does that mean it's haram for us too? So you try to understand when is the ruling one way and why it's that way. So if the hadith says grow your beard, like right now there's all these kids, really they're just children, dabbling and stuffing their hand into the ahkam shar'iyya and blowing up, when somebody doesn't have a beard or their beard isn't long and so on. They don't even understand the basics of this topic. So they asked what's the evidence, so they're muttaba', but they're the most basic level of muttaba', which they don't even understand the opinion of others who say that no, it's not an obligation. So I follow the opinion that the beard is a recommendation. Although really all men should grow a beard for a lot of reasons. It makes you identifiable as a Muslim. There's lots of other reasons for it too. It gives you an element of self-respect too. So, but the most important thing is one of the sunan of the fitrah. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ said that it's one of the sunnahs, one of the practices of good human nature. right? And Ibrahim alayhi salam is one of the, it's narrated that he was the one who established this. It was growing the beard and shortening the mustache and pulling out your armpit hairs and a number of other things. So, and like using miswak, brushing your teeth and so on. So these are the basics of good character and hygiene and good behavior in terms of what's natural for a human being. Men can grow beards, women can't grow beards, and so on. So so a muttaba is going to say, the Prophet ﷺ said, grow your beard and trim your mustache. Is this an obligation? First of all, if they even ask the evidence, that's a very good step. You've gone from an ami to a muttaba now. But to be a good muttaba, you want to find out, why is this an obligation? Well, because the Prophet ﷺ said so. Well, the Prophet ﷺ said a lot of things. The ayah in the Quran said, فَإِذَا حَلَلْتُمْ فَاصْطَادُوا. If you finish from the ihram of Hajj, go hunt. Does that mean I have to go hunt after Hajj? I have to go hunt after Umrah? No. Just because there's a command doesn't mean that it's an obligation. And that's where the different schools of thought differ. In some schools of thought, they say that the default of a command is obligation. Others say no, the default of a command is recommendation. And there has to be evidences to indicate that it's an obligation or not an obligation. And the school of thought that I follow, and this is the opinion of Hizb al-Tahrir, is that a command is looked at as simply a command. It's not seen as an obligation or recommendation or anything. It starts off as just a command, and we are responsible for analyzing the circumstances to figure out which one it is. So it's not that it's not an obligation. It's not that it is an obligation. Rather, it's neutral. We assign it to the category of neutral. When the Prophet said, grow your beard, trim your mustache. And therefore, once we identify that it's in the category of neutral, we need evidences to indicate if it goes into the recommendation category, moves over, or it goes into the obligation category, or whatever other category, the makruh, which is not recommended, or the haram, the forbidden category. There's 5 categories of ahkam shar'iyya. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So in this hadith, how do we know? So the opinion that I follow is that it's recommended. It's mustahab. You get reward. You're ajr. The whole time you have a beard, you're just getting rewards. So, but if I don't have a beard, I'm not committing sin. So it's not an obligation, it's recommendation. How do I know? There's what's called a qarina, an indicative evidence, a second evidence that combines with this evidence that gives us the understanding of what is correct, which is the sunan al-fitra hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said there are a number of things that are part of the sunnahs of fitra. The word sunnah in and of itself means it's not an obligation. One of them is growing the beard and trimming the mustache. So therefore, it's a recommendation. It's a bigger topic. And people who say, well, all the scholars agree that it's an obligation. No, that's not true. If you go to the original narrations of the 4 schools of thought, Imam Shafi'i, Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, and Imam Ibn Hanbal, only Ibn Hanbal has one narration assigned to him, and there's difference of opinion. Some say that Imam Ibn Hanbal had 2 different opinions. None of the other scholars actually commented on the obligation of the beard, and only there's a narration from Imam Ibn Hanbal that commented. People say that Imam Shafi'i had a narration about him. I studied this. He only talked about it's forbidden to rip the beard off of someone's face, but he didn't comment on the obligation of the beard. And Imam Ibn Hanbal, they say that he had 2 opinions. So that's the thing, is that people just don't know, and they're babbling online, and because they hear something from Saudi Arabia or from one school of thought, and they say this is the absolute truth, these are the followers of the true Salaf Salih, and they're just it's completely false. They're speaking without knowledge. They haven't studied. They don't know how these things work. The truth of the matter is there's difference of opinion. As I said, there's 2 different opinions on these topic, multiple opinions on multiple topics, and therefore in order to but going back to the original point, which is that to be a muttaba, you need to when somebody gives you the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jalla, and all of us should be practicing this. It's not acceptable to remain as an ammi. You're an ammi just because you just don't know anything, but especially new Muslims and so on. But you must get to the muttaba level, and really, everyone should be trying to become a mujtahid to a very basic level, to have a great deal of knowledge. And on the path from muttaba to get to mujtahid, you can become a faqih, which is a person who understands all the opinions but doesn't know how to derive his own laws. And there's other different, but the faqih is really where everyone should be, a minimum really. But to get there, we must all get in the habit of knowing the evidences for every ruling that we follow. So we live our lives as Muslims, and also we lead the ummah and the world, knowing our evidences, knowing why we're doing what we're doing, and knowing the strength of the evidences. Not just that the Prophet ﷺ said this. The Prophet ﷺ said, grow your beard and trim your mustache. What's the authenticity of this hadith? This hadith is sahih, taken from Sahih al-Bukhari. Now I know that it's sahih. right? So you have to know where the narrations are coming from, so you know the strength and you know what the hadith is. Not just somebody says a hadith, you also need to know the strength of the hadith. So this is how we understand the topic of the level of knowledge of people and how to follow the ahkam shar'iyya. So in this, and I'm gonna, like I said, now that I have this, this point up here, I'm gonna explain them, and then we'll just read the book to kind of confirm what I'm saying, which is that with the mujtahideen, the mujtahid mas'ala and the mujtahid madhab and the mujtahid mutlaq, when they come to an opinion, they come to a conclusion, that conclusion, even if they're wrong according to Allah Azza wa Jalla, so let's say they only find out on the Day of Judgment that they were wrong, but even if they're wrong, but they don't know they're wrong, to their best ability, this is the ruling of Allah Azza wa Jalla, they have to follow it literally like it is actually directly wahy from Allah Azza wa Jalla, as if Allah Azza wa Jalla told them that this is the correct opinion. They're not allowed to follow a different opinion, because this is your conclusion. You're not allowed to, what right do you have to switch to something else? So if you find stronger evidences, you can switch. If for some reason you no longer believe that you're qualified, let's say you believe that you might have some mental issues, or your memory's gotten really bad, or you realize that your assessment has gotten, something's wrong with it, okay, then you might distrust your own ijtihad, ability to do ijtihad, then you can switch and so on. But if there's no problem, and you're a mujtahid and you have the knowledge and you reach a conclusion, even if you don't like the conclusion, it's a difficult conclusion. I have to start doing more stuff. I have to start sacrificing more stuff. Doesn't matter. That's your conclusion. That's what you have to follow. In terms of the muqallid, either ammi or muttaba', when they follow the opinion of one scholar, you have to stick with that scholar. You're not allowed to switch. So as soon as you pick one, that's why I pick based on what you believe is the most trustworthy, knowledge, character, whatever, what you believe is most likely the correct ruling of Allah Azza wa Jalla for what you know now. Once you start following one scholar, you are, and it's like we said, it's agreed upon, first of all, that the scholars can't use a different opinion. And what I'm now adding, which we're going to talk about it, which is that once you act apart, so this is the next part, which is if the muqallid follows a mujtahid in a hukum of any issue and acts according to it, so you follow and now you implement it even once, he is not allowed to leave that hukum for another mujtahid at all. Okay, so you're not allowed to switch opinions under any circumstances. So you're not allowed to switch. Because the reason why you would switch is why the only time you can switch is if there's an actual reason, such as you no longer trust this scholar. You don't trust his knowledge. Like I've had scholars that I'd followed, and then I found out that they have corruption as people. They have, for example, although alhamdulillah, I haven't followed any scholars that had done this, but some people had followed scholars who are loyal to tyrant governments and are still loyal to them, even till today. So that scholar, you throw them in the garbage. They're loyal to the Saudi government, even after all of what they've done. This is a piece of garbage. It's not a human being that you should be following on Hukm Shari. So you dump his opinions and you go find somebody who's trustworthy. So you can switch for these sorts of reasons. However, it is permissible for the muqallid to follow the mujtahid in other issues. Okay, so it's permissible for you to follow one scholar on one issue and another scholar on another issue. One madhab on one issue and another madhab on another issue. Because ijma' sahaba permitted that a muqallid may ask a different scholar on a different issue. So we have an evidence. Remember, muttaba'. We have an evidence that indicates to us, ijma' sahaba is an evidence. The four sources of law for Muslims is Quran, Sunnah, ijma' sahaba, which is the consensus of the companions. It's a topic that I think we will cover. But even if we don't, you can go look it up and study what it means. And then qiyas. Qiyas is also another element of taking one ruling and applying it to another situation that matches certain conditions. And so we have an evidence from ijma' sahaba that tells us that the sahaba, they allowed the other companions who were not mujtahideen to follow one scholar on one opinion and follow another scholar on another topic. But they can't switch between scholars just because they just don't feel like doing the ruling anymore. If the muqallid assigns himself for a certain school of thought, a madhab, such as the Shafi'i, and committed himself to follow the entire madhab, then the following applies to him. The muqallid is not allowed to follow any other mujtahid on an issue that he has already practiced according to the madhab he is following. So you might say, I am going to follow all the opinions of the Shafi'i school of thought. That doesn't restrict you. You're only restricted when you apply the ruling. If I pray according to the Shafi'i, I now have to follow the Shafi'i school of thought until I have a valid Shari'i reason to switch. I can now, but I can now can go. I can, even though I said I'm following the whole entire Shafi'i school of thought, I can now switch to the Hanafi school. Not switch, sorry. If I'm now for the first time in my life fasting and I'm following the rules of fasting, and I follow the Hanafi school of thought, I'm now restricted now to the Hanafi school of thought for fasting, and I'm restricted to the Shafi'i school of thought for praying. So new Muslims, they have to understand this. Now, people who've been living their whole lives and they've done all this stuff in the Shafi'i school of thought, or all in the Hanafi or the Maliki and so on, you're now once you've applied it, you're now assigned to that school of thought. And you can't switch unless you have a Shari'i reason, which is there's something wrong with the scholar, they're no longer reliable, you gain knowledge enough to be able to switch and so on. Regarding the issues that he has not practiced yet, he is allowed to follow the other mujtahideen, other schools of thought. However, if a mujtahid reached a hukm on an issue through his ijtihad, he is allowed to abandon the result of his ijtihad and follow another opinion, if it means the unification of all Muslims on one opinion, as has happened in the Bay'ah of Uthman. So it is permissible, so the exception to a mujtahid, so the three types of mujtahideen, it's permissible for them to abandon their opinion under one single condition, is if they are going to unite under the Khalifa. So the Khalifa has an opinion on a topic, and the mujtahid has a different opinion on the topic. He's allowed to abandon his opinion and follow the opinion of the Khalifa, and everyone, so that everyone unites on one single opinion. This is something that is allowed because of the Bay'ah, because during the time of Uthman ibn Affan, there's ijma' Sahaba that indicated that the Sahaba would abandon their opinions to follow one Khalifa, one leader, one Imam, so that we all are united on one single front in terms of implementing Islam in that particular on that particular issue, or on a number of issues that are interrelated. That's the end of the chapter. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.